Well, hello out there in MCTV land, Manchester, Auburn, Hooksett. This is the progress report for this. I believe this is the last Wednesday in the beautiful month of September.
It is.
And what a month it has been. We set temperature high records around the state today. Interesting, we don't set low temperature records much anymore here in New Hampshire, do we? We set high temperature records, and we did that today. My good friend Mike Farley is away on a well-deserved vacation. And next week, the show will air with Lou D'Alessandro as my co-host. And I apologize out there to you viewers that we are late getting underway, but we did have some technological issues that have now been resolved, so that we're happy to ask you to join us and participate by calling in at 640-3091. And one of my favorite people to have here with me on the show was with us tonight, and that's Deborah Arnesen, who's a media person in many venues, and including her own show in Concord, a show, I guess, and originates from Houston, Texas, and all kinds of things. And we have a lot of things we want to talk about. We hope you'll be interested in participating, but we're late getting underway, so let's get going on this beautiful, warm, sultry September Wednesday evening. Arnie, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's
pleasure
wonderful.
to be back.
Always wonderful to have you here. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing and about what your media career is like right now.
Well, we air on a little tiny community radio station, okay, in Concord, New Hampshire. The name of the show is called The Attitude. It's on Monday through Friday from 12 to 1, then re-airs from 7 to 8. But we throw the show up to the Pacifica Network out in California.
Oh, yes.
And they have all the community radio stations and 4 very large stations that take content down from that network. And we give it away. We just put it up there and say, if you like us, take us. So guess who's taken us? They've taken us in Maui, 5 stations in Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, the only Wiccan-owned radio station in New York, and our biggest station, everyone, just to let you know, is Houston, Texas.
Really?
We're on a 100,000-watt station in Houston, Texas, KPFT in Houston, one of the oldest radio stations probably in the country from a progressive point of view.
Well, if you get a radio station's calls letter start with K, you know it's an old...
It's a very old It's a very old station. So, but a couple of things, because we air on this huge station, Texas has really become part of our repertoire, so we spend a lot of time talking about Texas. And so I have like 2 interesting stories. One is when Harvey hit Houston, we were devastated because it's our biggest audience. And but there's something you need to know about Houston that I'm not sure everyone is aware of. Not only was there incredible devastation as a result of Harvey, but 600,000 people that live in Houston, Texas are undocumented.
Really?
Can I repeat that number? Yeah. How many people are in New Hampshire? 1.3 million?
Yeah.
About that?
Yeah.
So think of this. About half the state of New Hampshire now living in Houston.
Population is what?
It's 4 million? Right. It's the 5th or 4th largest city in the country. But I just want people to understand 600,000 people. And this is important to remember, one, because obviously they're part of the fabric of the community. They're not going to get any kind of response from FEMA. So they have lost their housing, they have lost their cars, they may have lost, at least temporarily, their work opportunity. But if you're going to be rebuilding Houston and you need to do it yesterday, the last thing you want to do is complain about the 600,000 undocumented immigrants who are going to be there to help rebuild their city.
You need people to put new drywall in and take out the old drywall and do some roofing and all
it's going to be so interesting to see how the administration and FEMA and HUD begin to address not only the problems that we experienced in Harvey with Houston and Louisiana, but obviously the enormous devastation that also occurred in Florida with Irma, places like Jacksonville that saw more flooding than they've ever seen in their history, and they weren't expecting that, all right?
They're on the east side of the peninsula.
Exactly. And now, let's throw in what just happened in the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico.
Yes.
So we are going to be hemorrhaging dollars, but more importantly, we're going to be needing people to help. And that means people with skills. That means people that are young. So, for example, if something like that happened in the state of New Hampshire, you know why it would be problematic? We have the 2nd oldest median age in the country. We are an old state. So even if everybody was working, they couldn't do a good job. No No offense.
No,
but they don't know how to do these things.
I'm
so-
not about to climb up roofs to help
No,
fix
exactly,
those.
exactly. So we have already started to see the administration suspend certain things, and this will get us back to Puerto Rico. For example, the Jones Act. And the Jones Act really is an act that sort of regulates shipping and who can actually come into a port and who can't come into a port.
Basically requires that U.S. flag ships
Right.
transport between U.S. ports, right?
Right, exactly. So when Harvey hit, Houston was able to get, for a couple of weeks, the Jones Act suspended. When Irma hit, Florida was able to get the Jones Act suspended. And what
So
we
that
find
foreign
out,
flag ships could help deliver relief.
which they had to do, okay? This was essential for life and limb. And it turns out that they have not yet, on this island called Puerto Rico, suspended the Jones Act. And I just want everyone to know that I just read this to Bob, all right? When Donald Trump was asked the question today, are you going to suspend the Jones Act, he sort of mumbled and didn't do a direct answer.
Probably
And-
because he didn't know what the Jones Act was.
No, he does, and this is how we know he does. He reminded the reporters that some of his biggest supporters were people in the shipping industry, and that those very wealthy shipping magnates were really putting pressure on him not to suspend the Jones Act.
He
So
said
I-
that?
What did everyone, I will read it to you. Listen to what he said. This is
unbelievable.
Trump admits that his rich cronies are stopping him from giving Puerto Rico the help it needs. So let me quote Donald Trump. Are you ready?
I am.
Responding to the reporter's question about was he going to do this, Trump first offered his standard non-answer. We're thinking about it, before whining that, quote, ready? We have a lot of shippers and a lot of people that work in the shipping industry that don't want the Jones Act lifted.
My goodness.
All right? Now,
Now,
it was okay to
how long
lift
are
it.
these people in Puerto Rico American citizens?
Yes, they
I
are.
kind of thought they were.
That's right, but they speak a
They're
different
not.
language.
They're not a state. They're not. Most of them, Spanish is their first language.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of English spoken, but the Spanish is their first language. They don't have a voting member of Congress. I
No.
think they have a non-voting member.
Non-voting member.
And and it's interesting to compare the support through our government provided to Florida and Texas, two politically very important states for both parties in every election, especially in presidential elections, and Puerto Rico, which really doesn't have that kind of clout. Is that going to affect the quality of the effort that we make on behalf of our fellow Americans? And these are our fellow Americans.
90% of the island does not have electricity. Right now, they haven't heard from most of the hospitals on the island because they can't contact them, and we know they don't have electricity. You know, their generators right now are probably running out of power, and they haven't been able to contact those hospitals.
Yeah.
That means those hospitals become death traps. Understand what's going on here. And here's the other interesting thing. There is pressure right now on Donald Trump. All the living presidents have all just come together to start raising money for Puerto Rico. All the living presidents have just started a fund. What does that tell you about the fact that they are shocked at how we are knuckle dragging in response to this? It is so much worse than Katrina, you can't even fathom it.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. And you know what it does beg a question, and let me tell you what the question is. You know how we're constantly talking about security, and we're talking about North Korea, and we're worried about Afghanistan and Iran having nukes and all this stuff. I wonder what part of security we don't address when it comes to looking at the kind of storms that we are now facing on a much more intense level. And when you die in an Irma or a Harvey, you're dead. When you die in Afghanistan, you're dead. And I just want people to know that there's a security response now that I think the U.S. military has to begin to embrace. They need to not only respond to what's happening in Afghanistan and in North Korea, but we need to have some kind of response that can be available to go to places like Puerto Rico, and they need to figure out how are they going to respond there. Because that is security as well. You know, it's
And
so
apparently
important.
the Defense Department gets it.
They do.
They do think that climate change is a major threat to the security of the United
But they
States.
haven't prepared a military sort of exercise that understands that they don't just have to exercise along the coast of China and Japan and Korea and North Korea, but they need to start doing exercises in places like where the Virgin Islands is and where Puerto Rico is, because they may need to respond.
Yeah.
It's so important.
It's just appalling.
It is
And if
appalling.
you're watching the coverage, folks, you'll see most of the stand-ups that are able to get to broadcast, they're doing it from San Juan, which is the capital city of
Right.
Puerto Rico.
Right.
The places they can't get to show you their
Complete devastation.
complete devastation is where things are getting desperate. And this hurricane hit a week ago, and the response is inadequate. I think you can all, never mind what Trump says about how great it is. He says everything's great in his world, but it's not great. It's desperate, and lives are at stake.
So you know what I would love to hear from? I told you I air my show in Houston, and someone sent me a copy of the Houston Chronicle because there was a beautiful letter from New Orleans to Houston. Because after Katrina, thousands and
Many went
thousands
to
of
Houston.
people went to Houston, and Houston sent thousands of people to New Orleans to help. And they sent really a love letter that we are with you, we are there to help you, if you need us, come to us. It was beautiful. What I would love to see right now is New Orleans and Houston and Jacksonville and Florida send a letter to Puerto Rico. I want them, because I want us to know that we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
So anyway, it breaks my heart.
It
just breaks
is
my heart.
heartbreaking that we have responded, at least to this time. Maybe it'll improve, but right so far, it seems like the response has been wholly inadequate to the devastation and danger to the
And
citizens.
the question is, how many people will die?
3.4 million people on this island that are American citizens.
Right.
And meanwhile, I'm interested in your take on this. Mr. Trump seems much more interested in the flag issue at the NFL football games. What do you think about that?
So, I have to ask a question. What were they doing? They were taking a knee, is that correct?
That's right.
Now,
Or
I'm going
maybe
to ask
some of
your
them
audience, I'm going to
were
ask your audience.
linking arms.
Right, but they were taking a knee. So, normally when you genuflect, where are you doing it? You're doing it in church, all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right? And usually when you're genuflecting or taking a knee in church, you're praying, right? So I am going to redefine what we saw happen with Colin Kaepernick and now a number of other people in the NFL. This isn't an act of public protest. This is an act of public prayer. Listen to me, public prayer. They're praying that people actually reflect our better angels. They are praying that we actually revere the words of the Constitution. They are praying that we understand the words of the Bill of Rights. They are not asking for something negative. They are asking for equality. They are asking for fairness. They are asking for justice. They are praying for that. That is what they are doing. They are praying for that. And it's really fascinating. There was a wonderful article in the Washington Post. What's his name? Tebow? The guy, the football player? He took a knee,
Trying to be
too.
a baseball player.
Right. But he took a knee, too. He took a knee to do a private prayer to God that his team would win.
He's a very, very religious person.
Well, guess what? So is Colin Kaepernick. Did
Yeah.
you know that?
No, I didn't.
No, he is. They're both very religious. They're both very. If you look at one is a Methodist, the other is a Baptist. One was raised by missionaries, the other was adopted by a family. They're
Okay.
both very religious. They both have this idea that they should sort of save the world. Kaepernick gives money away all the time. He's given lots of money away. And isn't it interesting? When Tebow did his genuflect and took a knee, he became the darling. When Kaepernick took a knee because of injustice, he became the enemy. And I just want people to realize, what was he doing? He was actually, I think, a form of public prayer, asking us to live up to really what is the expectation of this country.
Well, the color of the skin is different, too. That could be
I
a
understand
lot of it.
that.
That
I
could be a
understand
lot
that.
of
I
it.
understand that. I understand that. But I think that that's really important.
But I have to say, Arnie, that having listened to people talk about this, Trump is going to turn this into a win for himself. Because he's made it into it. This is disrespecting the national anthem or the flag.
The military. He's making it
whatever,
anti-military.
Whatever, And, this is an astounding number of people that agree with him. That'll say, we want to defend the First Amendment, the right to express your views, even if they're unpopular. But there's not a lot of real sympathy for these people, I'm afraid to say.
Well,
And so even though Trump is failing in so many things, he hasn't been able to repeal, even, never mind, replace Obamacare. That's come a cropper. He has essentially no legislative accomplishments of any sort in his first 260 days, whatever is in office. But he keeps finding a way to make himself appealing to, a lot of Americans who...
he's deflecting.
He's deflecting.
And at some point in time, I'm just going to ask people, are you tired of being his pawn? Because that's exactly what you are. He's deflecting away from the fact that health care failed. He's deflecting away from his real poor response to Puerto Rico. He's deflecting away from things that he is not able to accomplish. I mean, for example, Roy Moore. That was not his candidate.
Right.
Roy Moore, it's a deflection away from Roy Moore.
Yep.
And I think that people need to understand that this is why he's doing it. He's throwing you a piece of red meat and saying, don't you love this? But in the end, what you wanted was that health care promise that he's not going to be able to deliver.
Right.
What you wanted was him to be able to protect those seats in the Senate and show you that, he has coattails, of which he doesn't have coattails.
Well, that's apparently what this election in Alabama may show. It's only one election, and it may not be as important as people think, but it is interesting that...
Well, Donald Trump probably, to be honest with you, 6 months ago couldn't pick out Strange from Moore in a lineup.
Yeah.
He's not a Republican. He
Yeah.
never has been a Republican. This isn't about ideology.
No, it's-
This is about Trumpism.
Yeah.
And Roy Moore is perfect, because just the way Donald Trump loves to inflame, loves to offend, Roy Moore has actually gotten a PhD in that. That's why he's been asked to step down from the Alabama Supreme Court not once but twice, and what he says about gays and what he said about 9/11.
Yeah.
What he said about 9/11.
The penalty for our perversions.
Yes, penalty for our perversions.
Yeah.
Tell the thousands of people that died. Tell the people that came to rescue them. Tell them that they died because of someone's perversions.
Folks,
I mean,
if you don't
it's
know
amazing.
this, Roy Moore, who just won this
Oh.
primary in Alabama, will now be the Republican candidate in the finals in November. He was down there, they elect judges. Thank God in New Hampshire we don't elect judges.
Right.
In most of New England, we don't elect judges. It's a terrible idea. We got enough problems with our political process without elevating our judiciary or lowering our judiciary to that process. But he was an elected chief judge of the Supreme Court of Alabama, and he insisted upon putting up the statue of the...
Ten Commandments,
the
the tablets.
10 Commandments.
He actually had them constructed himself. This was not a state project.
And this was a tough thing. This was a big piece of sculpture, folks.
Yeah, it was
big.
huge.
And he was ordered to do so by the federal courts, who said it was not consistent with the First Amendments of prohibiting the establishment of religion. And he was held in contempt for
He was
failure
removed.
to
He was
comply with
removed.
that order and removed from the court. This is the guy they've elected down in Alabama to represent them and to replace Jeff Sessions, who, by the way, is now the Attorney General. I'm not sure how much longer he's going to be, because Trump has had plenty of unkind things to say about him. But Jeff Sessions was once up for a federal judgeship as a lawyer in Alabama, and was rejected by the Senate Judiciary Committee and then by the full Senate as unqualified because of racist comments he'd made. Now he became a U.S. Senator, and now he's been picked by Trump, his very first cabinet pick, to be the Attorney General of the United States.
Well, that's because Jeff Sessions was one of the very first people with any sort of, I guess you can call it, credibility in the United States Senate that came out and supported Donald Trump.
Indeed, he was the very first senator to
When
support
Donald Trump was, paying people $50 to hold signs for him and coming down elevators, and everybody was making fun of him, Jeff Sessions saw an opportunity. He jumped on that opportunity, and now they're bonded. And in a funny way, I think Jeff Sessions will be there till the end of the Trump administration. I really
Really?
do. I do.
That's an interesting prediction.
I think he actually, in a funny way, needs Sessions as much as he may be irritated with Sessions, and it's going to be, and I feel for Mitch McConnell. I said something before we came on the air, that Mitch McConnell became the Antichrist to Roy Moore. Roy Moore did not run against Donald Trump. Roy Moore did not run against the Democratic Party. Roy Moore did not run against draining the swamp. He ran against Mitch McConnell. All right, that's who he ran against. Remember, Mitch McConnell is the Republican head of the Senate.
Yeah.
And what I said to Bob
Tried so valiantly to push across something, anything,
I know.
to undo Obamacare.
Right, anything
and
for Donald Trump.
Utterly failed.
Right.
And he's getting no credit for his valiant efforts from Mr. Trump, I can tell you.
Oh, except that he's losing even more credibility, because in some ways, what Roy Moore was so successful at doing was making him the enemy. And what I said to Bob was, so I just saw an interesting article the other day, maybe it was at WMUR, that we have a similar problem in New Hampshire, and that is there are a number of free staters in New Hampshire
Yeah.
who basically would like to see New Hampshire basically leave, secede from the United States. I mean, that's their goal.
Yeah,
Their goal
yeah,
isn't about taking over the state. Their goal is to make it a country, okay? I mean, that's what they want to do. And so a number of free staters are running for election, both at the local level and at the state level, and they've decided to pick up a certain party ticket. It's called Republican. And Sean,
But there are some that pick the Democratic
I
ballot,
think there were
too.
two. I think mostly Republican.
Mostly Republican,
Mostly
but
Republican.
if it's more convenient or more congenial
Right.
to their chances,
So-
some will take the Democratic label.
So it's put Sean Jasper, who is the Speaker of the House, in a very, very difficult situation, because they're running as Republicans, and he doesn't really want to embrace them, because they represent a lot of things that the Republicans historically do not represent. And frankly, the fact that they want to pull New Hampshire out of the United States is one of those things.
Yeah.
And he's like Mitch McConnell right now. How do you embrace Roy Moore, who basically hates your guts? And in a lot of ways, how does Sean Jasper embrace those free staters who basically want to flip the bird at him?
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
amazing. It's amazing, Bob.
I just want to mention, a local election we had here just in the environs of Manchester yesterday, Tuesday, and that was a special election in the towns of Chester, Auburn, and Sandown. Now, folks, if you don't know New Hampshire's political landscape, you may not know this is the very heart of the reddest of red part of New Hampshire. Basically, from Manchester to the seacoast to the Mass border, those towns down there, like Chester, like Plaistow, like, I don't know, Fremont,
Yeah.
those towns are extremely Republican by registration, overwhelmingly Republican.
And overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump by
Oh, yeah.
like 30 points.
In this particular district down there, a woman named Lori Kerner decided to take on the apparently impossible task of winning the election as a Democrat, and yesterday she did it. She did it. She carried her hometown. I can't remember. I think it was Chester, and the Republican carried one of the other towns. I think it was Auburn, and the vote came down to a few votes in Sandown, and she got enough votes to prevail. There's going to be a recount,
Yeah.
but there's about a 60-vote margin, so unless something's really awry, she's going to prevail. And this is astounding, folks. This is the fourth most Republican district in the state of New Hampshire, and a Democrat
I don't know
apparently
her.
has won.
Do you know her at all?
I did meet her, and
All
I
right,
think
so-
she's an excellent
So
person.
what's her bio? What's her background?
I can't tell you her bio. I think she has an education background, but
Okay.
she is a very attractive person and very hardworking. She went out
Obviously.
and just worked her
Obviously.
tail off with a lot of good help.
Well,
I mean, folks...
You're not going to get a vote unless you ask for it.
You're not going to get away. And she asked a lot and
Yeah.
hard, and had a lot of good volunteers helping her out. So congratulations, Lori. This is an outstanding victory. I don't know if there's ever been a Democrat elected in this district. Certainly it hasn't been with anybody's memory. So that's kind of an exciting thing. So you want to weigh in on that and the other stuff we're talking about, please give us a call. But let's go back to some more problems on the national level while we, for some of us at least, we savor the victory that Lori had in her district in Rockingham County.
We do have 400 legislators. Let me just remind everyone.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
The elite 400, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The newest thing today that we got from Trump was his tax plan. Did you get into that at all?
A tiny bit. And obviously, the word middle class is going to be used, ad nauseum, that he's going to help working people. And at this point, you see a corporate tax cut. You see a tax cut for the wealthy. You see they're going to get rid of the estate tax. I mean, so much of the benefits clearly go to one place and one place alone. And that's not surprising. What can I say?
Yeah.
It's not surprising. And you know, the devil's in the details, and right now even Donald Trump has no clue to what the details
The
are.
details,
because
he does not have
he
details.
doesn't care. He just says, here's what he says, I'm not going to benefit. So let me just ask a question. How do we know Donald Trump is not going to benefit? Because he keeps talking about how he's going to help people that, like, for example, have LLCs. Do you know how many LLCs Donald Trump has? I think it may be hundreds of LLCs. So we don't know anything about his taxes. We don't know what he pays. We don't know how he hides his money. And so when he talks about this tax plan and not benefiting him, I would love to believe Donald Trump, but it's really hard to believe him since he hasn't shared that information with anyone.
Right. I think he's the first president since probably Nixon, and maybe, I guess it's Nixon, isn't it, who has failed to produce any tax returns when running for president of the United States. I mean, it's just astonishing that
So do
we
we all
wanna-
get to pull a Trump? Is that, I mean, I'm trying to figure, does he change the landscape? Does he now set the standard for how to, in this case, misbehave, not be transparent, or is he going to be the blip?
Yeah.
It really scares me.
Yeah, is this just a one-off, or is it a precedent?
Is it a precedent?
In the future, we will not have our candidates release their tax returns.
Right.
And we need that information. We need, for one thing, I'd like to know, what has Trump ever done to help other people through charitable contributions? What has he done? We know he's contributed to his own foundation. One of the reasons he did that was that they created a 6-foot mural of himself.
Of himself, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing, if that's his idea of charity, not so good, I would suggest. Not so good, but, that we have this, and the other thing that gripes me is all during the thing he said, I will release my tax returns, I'll release it, when I get through the primary, I'll release it when the audit's done. He's never going to release his tax returns. He's never going to do it unless somehow he's forced to. I think we should, have a requirement that people that end up with major party nominations for President of the United States release their tax returns.
And Trump is even more unusual than other presidents in the sense that he has had so much contact and investments around the world. And one of the big concerns everyone always has is the influence of China, the influence of Russia, the influence of Japan on the behavior of political activity. Now, we
Yeah.
keep talking about the Russian connection. I just kind of want to know, because I know that he kind of invests in lots of things. He wanted to put a hotel in Moscow. He wasn't successful at it. By the way, speaking of Puerto Rico, do you know there is a contact for Donald Trump in Puerto Rico? I wanted to know why he didn't care about Puerto Rico. And I was curious if he ever had an investment in Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico would be a place that he might consider investing in. He did. A golf course. It went bankrupt. It went bankrupt. So I just want everyone to know that I actually Googled that just to see whether I could find it. And it turns out, yes, he did have an investment. It went bankrupt. So therefore, he doesn't have to repair, Puerto Rico because there isn't anything there. It's not Mar-a-Lago. It's a bankrupt golf course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
And apparently it's
so
come out that...
predictable. Oh, my God.
Apparently it's come out that with this devastation in Puerto Rico, like, I guess nothing the island's ever seen, certainly not within living memory. He had 4 times as many tweets devoted to denouncing NFL players that took a knee during the national
Because his
anthem.
base doesn't care about Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that's right.
Because his base doesn't care
Yeah,
about
that's
Puerto Rico.
right. It's-
Because when they talk about life, and they talk about Christianity, and they talk about Bible, and they talk about family, obviously it doesn't mean people from Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I mean, those people are expendable.
Yeah.
And I am devastated at the number of people who are going to die, and we already know it.
Yeah.
We don't know what the numbers are, but it's always been true though. It's not the storm that kills.
It's the aftermath.
It's the aftermath. It's
Like
the
we saw in
aftermath.
Florida with that nursing home with
Exactly.
11 fatalities.
It's the aftermath. So I don't know, Bob. It's
It's-
been a very tough week.
It's been a very tough week.
And can we just talk a little bit about Graham Cassidy, because I want to bring why this terrible bill is a terrible bill, and
Oh,
why
yeah.
I'm so glad this terrible bill never came to fruition.
Yep.
And I like Lindsey Graham. I actually do like Lindsey Graham. I don't know what Lindsey Graham was doing, because he so embraced this bill. And what this bill...
I think I know what he was doing, but go ahead.
I think I may too, but this bill was really a shift in shaft. What it did was it took the sort of national response to health care and basicotted it to all 50 states.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant that the states suddenly were going to be responsible, but it was a good thing, because we would have flexibility. So here's my question. If you used to get $100 million, and if you needed more money, you would get more money because you had greater need for Medicaid or whatever, you would get $105 million. But if all of a sudden they said, but you know what, we're telling you too much on how to spend this $100 million, and we're tying your hands. Instead, we're going to send you $70 million. And we're going to tell you, do the same thing with $70 million, but you have flexibility. And I'm going to ask you, which would you rather have?
Yeah.
The $100 million or the $70 million? And that's part of the problem is that not only was it about quote-unquote flexibility, but it was about significantly less money, which is why 50 state Medicaid directors, every Medicaid director in the United States came out and said, you can't do this. But this is where it becomes a New Hampshire story, everyone. What do we know about New Hampshire? In New Hampshire, whenever the state doesn't have the requisite money to address a problem, what does it do?
Puts it on the property tax. There you go.
Exactly.
A real broad-based tax that
Oh
we
my
have
God!
here in New Hampshire.
And actually, someone wrote that. Someone did an analysis of Graham Cassidy and said cities and counties were going to experience the worst response to this because they were going to get shafted because ultimately the state would pass the responsibility and the burden on them.
Yeah.
Unbelievable, Bob. Unbelievable. So
Well, it's time for a break. We're going
Yeah.
to take a quick break. I think this will be our only break in this edition of the Progress Report. And we hope you'll join us at 640-3091 when we come back. We'll have lots more to say, of course, because Arnie's never at a loss for words, and we'll be back in just a very short break. We'll be right back. This is the progress report for the last Wednesday in September. We are officially into fall. Certainly the temperature doesn't look like it, but we have, calendar-wise, moved into fall. September is always such a lovely month in New Hampshire. It's just too short, that's all. And I'm enjoying my time here, and I hope you're enjoying it out there with Arnie Arnesen, who's one of the favorite people that we have in this program, and we would have her more often if we could arrange it, but we're really glad she's here today. Mike Farley is off on a well-deserved vacation, and next week I'll be back with Lou D'Alessandro, and look forward to being with you at that time. And we've just been having a wide-ranging conversation about our current president and his policies, about the disaster to hit Puerto Rico, where 3.4 million Americans are in dire shape. And we've talked about a number of other things. And I thought we might go on to some other topics with Arnie.
Can I just make a pitch for the C-SPAN? I want to.
Please do.
So
Please do.
let me just share with everyone. C-SPAN has decided to do something called the 50-State Cities Tour. And they have picked one city in every state to go in and drill down. So they interview all kinds of interesting people. And I think it was June of this summer, maybe July, they came to Concord, and Concord was going to be the city they were focusing on in New Hampshire. And I was very lucky because they came to my house. And the reason they came to my house, everyone, is that not only do I live in this remarkable house, but it was owned...
Which you have made remarkable. It's just a wonderful place.
But it was owned by a remarkable couple. And I am building on that tradition because Marty Gross was a very powerful Democrat. He was married to Carolyn Gross, a very powerful Republican.
Yep.
And they had no children, but politics was their child. And so they opened their house, to everyone. I mean, we have a plaque over the door where Jimmy Carter slept. We have the Al Gore bathroom. We have pictures of Bob Dole and Bill Clinton standing in the living room. So this house really, it oozes politics. And you go to C-SPAN City Tour and take a look. It's about maybe 10 minutes. It's a story of a house, but it's also a story of New Hampshire, because we really do play such an important role in presidential politics. And one of the stories I told actually relates to Joyce Craig. It will relate to what happens in the 2018 election. And what I reminded both our New Hampshire audience, but the national audience, is that because presidential campaigns begin the day after the election of the next president. So
Right.
in 2016, November 8th, we elected Donald Trump. On November 9th, the Rolodexes were getting opened, and they were already beginning to figure out who was going to run for president, both maybe it's a Republican, Kasich, or a Democrat, and you can list about 5 or 6 people
Oh,
who are
yes, there was
interested.
quite a gallery of them in the Concord Monitor today, and the number of Democrats that have been here
Already.
once or more than, many
Right,
of them more
right,
than once, from Martin
right.
O'Malley
Oh,
to
Martin's never left.
Congressman O'Ryan,
Right.
Ryan from
Yep.
Ohio, and,
Who almost ran for Nancy Pelosi's seat.
yeah.
Right. So, but what I said was, I said, not only do you see this conga line of candidates start showing up and creating relationships and kissing babies, but you also start seeing a lot of the same politicians looking to see who's going to be elected mayor of Manchester, who's going to be elected governor of New Hampshire, who's going to be the Speaker of the House. Because what's really important to presidential candidates is they want to have a couple of notches on their belt. And what does that mean? They want to be able to go into Manchester. Let's say Joyce Craig wins. So if you're a Democratic candidate, you really want Joyce to win because Manchester's the Queen City, Manchester's such an important place, and you would like to be able to have the mayor walk you around the city because it adds to your je ne sais quoi. So I was telling the national audience that it isn't just national politics that's kind of infected our state and local politics, because they not only cut checks and send people in, but it's really in their interest, as they assume, to see that a Democrat or Republican wins, because it means they have a toehold in New Hampshire. It's just it's an amazing, I mean, you can be a real junkie here
Yeah.
and get addicted, but the C-SPAN thing is really, Chuck Douglas did carpool karaoke with the reporter from C-SPAN. And Chuck, there's a segment with Chuck Douglas, who knows everything about every political player. And he sort of gets this drive around of Concord, telling stories of Concord and who slept here and who was here and who did what.
Right.
So it's really, I'm just going to recommend it. It's entertaining.
Yeah. And by the way, folks, if you ever want to have a nice night out in Concord, go to Arnie's house, which is also a B&B.
Yeah.
And it's just delightful and wonderful, and she adds to the attraction, of course, but what a charming place to spend a night out with your best friend, your lover, your wife, whatever,
Right.
and enjoy a wonderful, wonderful evening, which is just
And let me just remind everyone that the way I do Airbnb is it's my house. I'm there to greet you. I'm there to tuck you in at night. I'm there to say goodbye. I make sure that the breakfast
Yeah.
is ready. I haven't taken an apartment and flipped it and used it for Airbnb. I haven't abandoned the house and just left a key.
Yep.
It's my house. But let me tell you the value of Airbnb from my perspective, and that is it has brought the world to me.
Yeah.
It has brought the world to me. If you could just spend a week at the house and meet the most remarkable people that show up, and they come from everywhere, from Singapore to
Yeah.
Minnesota to Ireland and Scotland to Bow, New Hampshire. Literally, that some people
Yeah.
come. And that is a way of, I think, shrinking the world in a really good way.
Yeah.
It's a really good thing.
I was at the State House today and had the wonderful opportunity to see some people walking around. The State House is actually quite a tourist attraction. A lot
Well, it's
of
the
people come there.
oldest, continuous use
Yeah.
state house in the country.
And I met a young, not young, but a very nice couple from Copenhagen, Denmark, and really enjoyed chatting with them. And then I met some folks from Oklahoma that were there to, coming around. It's not even the peak foliage season, so these folks are here.
And I have someone
It's
from
really
Minnesota
nice.
at my house right now, from St. Paul,
Yeah.
Minnesota. So there you go.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful thing, and people are paying their taxes. So just to let you know, we're paying our rooms and meals taxes. I just think come on, we need to contribute. If that's how we're going to generate revenue, everyone, then we need to do that.
While we're on the subject of your beautiful home, which is a B&B, which I would highly recommend anybody to try out. You don't have to drive a long distance to have a wonderful evening away. Talk about your fundraiser you got coming up for your program.
So this little radio station is going to be it's 5 years old this year. 5 years old, which is just amazing. And nobody gets paid except the station manager, who gets paid slave wages. Let me just basically, everyone does everything volunteer, including the engineer, including everyone. Kind of like public access TV is community radio. And, but yet we have shows that are remarkable. We have probably one of the best jazz guys, maybe even in the country, who knows more about jazz than you could possibly imagine. So on November 8th, everyone, we're having a fundraiser in Concord, and John Nichols of The Nation magazine is going to come out, and the reason we chose November 8th...
This will be at your home, right?
No, it won't be at my home. It'll be at the IBEW.
IBEW on Airport Road.
On Airport Road.
Okay.
And it will be November 8th, and John Nichols of The Nation just wrote a book called Trumpocalypse, which has gotten incredible reviews, and he's coming out to sort of talk about his book, and he'll be our sort of keynote speaker. But it really is a way to sort of reflect what has happened in that year. I mean, talk about a shock of shocks. If you listen to Hillary Clinton talk about her book, I think the most remarkable thing is she didn't have a concession speech. She didn't have a concession speech. And I think it's so funny, having run for office twice, I had both speeches. I had both speeches. And the second time I came incredibly close. And you need to have both speeches.
Well, you certainly do.
You know why? Because it changes how you approach the election.
I don't think the absence of concession speech was a problem, though, because she got up the next day and made a fine speech.
No, I don't mean it was a problem. It meant it was a headset.
Yeah, okay.
It was a headset. Because you should always, you want to win. There's no question.
Yeah.
And you envision winning.
Yeah.
And I love my favorite story about 2 weeks before the election for governor, and I would have been the first girl. Jeannie Shaheen turned out to be the first girl. But a reporter came to my house, and at that time, believe it or not, 2 weeks before the election.
You say girl?
I say girl.
I couldn't get away with that if I said it.
Well, I say it,
Okay.
because I am one. Anyway, and so a reporter came to my house and said, Arnie, there's a poll that says you're in a dead heat with Steve Merrill. I said, don't believe the poll. But anyway, so she said to me, so what's the first thing you do when you become governor? And you've been to my house, so this answer will not be surprising. I looked at her, and without skipping a beat, I said, rearrange the furniture. And I meant it in every way, shape, or form. So again, that's the difference, I think, in having possibly been elected the first female governor, is that I could actually say something like that, which is pretty exciting.
You'd have been the first elected female governor.
Yeah.
Not the first female governor, though.
No, we had her for, how about a week?
A week.
Vesta Roy.
Yeah, Vesta Roy.
Oh, I know.
I think that was when Hugh Gallen died, wasn't it?
Yep, Vesta
When she was
Roy.
the president of the Senate.
Yep.
So she got to be the governor for a very brief time.
But
And,
there is one other thing I want to sort of share, because we're talking about health care, too. We've been talking about it. I don't tell this story all the time, but I think I need to tell this story now, because Graham Cassidy did go down. This is the second time, rear its ugly head. And obviously, we need to fix the Affordable Care Act, and we probably need to do more than the Affordable Care Act. We know that. It's bankrupting us. It's not in the business of really providing health care. It still keeps something in the market that probably doesn't belong, which is the profit model.
Right.
Which is,
Right.
insurance
Agree with you
companies.
entirely.
Right. Insurance companies are not in the business of health. They're in the business of profit. Please understand, they are corporations. Can I repeat this? They are corporations, and corporations genuflect to one thing. They genuflect to their corporate
Shareholder
master.
value, that's
Right,
their goal.
shareholder value. So when I'm running for governor in 1992, it was the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Remember, we had lost all our banks. We had 2 bankrupt utilities. More people had left New Hampshire than any time since the Great Depression. We were hemorrhaging, everyone. We were hemorrhaging. And I came from a relatively low-income, middle-income family, and my husband was self-employed. And during the course of the campaign, I found a lump in my breast, all right? And I called my husband up and I said, I have to go to the doctor and get a mammogram. And my husband gets quiet on the other end of the phone. And he says, you can't. And I said, excuse me? He says, you can't. And I said, why not? And he said, my income has so dived because of this recession that I had to make a choice, pay our property taxes or pay our insurance bill.
Really?
And our property taxes, everyone, in
Wow.
Orford, New Hampshire, were about $7,000 because it was a town of 1,000 people that had a K through 12 school.
Oh, my goodness.
All right? So he said, and the reason I had to choose the property taxes, you will understand, is that that is a public document, and everyone will know if we don't pay our property taxes, and no one will know if I cancel the insurance.
Oh, my goodness.
So
Oh, my
I
goodness.
understood. I understood.
Wow.
So I lose the election, everyone, and about 3 or 4 months after we lose the election, we finally get back on insurance. And I go to the doctor for the first time, and the doctor says to me, when did you first feel this lump? And I said, about maybe 7 months ago. And the doctor gets really angry at me, and he says, why did you wait so long? And I said, we didn't have health insurance. And the doctor gets angry again. And he says, oh, Arnie, we have a sliding scale for a mammogram. You could have afforded that. And then I looked at the doctor and the nurse, and I said, but I couldn't afford the answer. Because until the Affordable Care Act, if it turned out I had breast cancer, I would have had a pre-existing condition, and my family could never afford health insurance. That's the power of the Affordable Care Act.
Wow.
Is that Arnie Arnesen,
That's
who
a
could have been your
powerful
governor, gave up her health insurance so she could prove to you that she paid her taxes, unlike Donald Trump, who was willing to risk life and limb to prove to you that she paid her damn taxes. And this doctor and nurse didn't understand why I couldn't get the mammogram, because I couldn't deny my family the possibility of their mother having a pre-existing condition and not being able to ever be able to access health insurance.
Wow.
If there's one piece of the Affordable Care Act that is so important, just that piece alone. And remember, Graham Cassidy lied. They said, oh, no, they still have to cover you. No. They have to cover you, but they can charge you. And when they charge you for a pre-existing condition, because they have to cover you, I don't know how many of you can afford $30,000 a year in health insurance or $25,000 a year in health insurance, because that may be not even close to the cost of what they would charge you for a pre-existing condition. So yes, on paper, you had to be included. But in reality, unless you're the 1%, you couldn't afford that pre-existing condition. So that happened, and it's going to sound strange, Bob. My biggest regret about losing the race for governor was that if I had been governor and they were starting to talk about health care reform, remember that was '92, that was the Hillary Care, that was, everyone was beginning to talk about something to do with addressing health care. Imagine if I could have testified in Washington about the governor that didn't have health insurance. You know, it would have brought it home, not only for people in that room, but it would have brought it home for everyone. We're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
We're all vulnerable. And
I have to
we
thank
have to
you for
fix it.
sharing that story, Arnie. I've not heard that before. I don't know how often you've told that story, but it is very powerful.
It's true.
Very personal, and tells the whole.
It tells the story.
It tells the whole story of our disastrous healthcare fiasco. And thank God that we did not repeal and.
But not thank God, because the Affordable Care Act needs help.
It does need
It
help.
needs help, and right now Donald Trump
And
is
I am more
not.
optimistic than ever that the eventual answer is going to be a single-payer system like every other major country has.
And we're not going to do it at once.
And we're being told we're almost
Oh,
to the end of the show,
okay.
but I'm certainly glad you got that story in, folks. I hope everybody out there felt the power of that, as I certainly did here. And I can only say that, Arnie, thank you for joining me. It's
You're
always
welcome.
such a pleasure to have
You're
you.
welcome.
And next week I'll be here with Lou D'Alessandro, and we will certainly, probably, I expect, have a guest next week. But Everybody have a good night. We'll be back
Ciao.
next week. Take care.